Joining us now is J.D. Hayworth, host of America's Forum. Hey, J.D.
Steve, it is good to be with you tonight, and obviously so many different races. You outlined two of the key Senate contests, but as we join you from our South Florida Election Center, obviously here in Florida and indeed nationwide, people are taking a look at this Florida governor's race, pitting the former governor and former Republican, now Democrat, Charlie Crist against the Republican incumbent Rick Scott. And there's a third factor in this race, a third person. The Libertarian Adrian Wiley could play a very important part in this race, Steve, as we have heard from pollster John Zogby, who will be with us tonight, who thus far has not missed a race in Florida during his polling days. He has Charlie Crist with a substantial lead. Steve, that would be a surprise to see Charlie open up that kind of lead, and yet that's what John Zogby polled and shared with us yesterday.
Well, let me point out that CNN is projecting that Mitch McConnell will be the winner once again of his Senate race in Kentucky, and that of course sets it up that should the Senate go Republican, that Mitch McConnell would be the majority leader. And I want to ask you, JD, before we throw it to John, you've been there. You feel the election night excitement in a way that I cannot relate to because you've run for office so many times. What's it like?
Well, you have gone out and you have done everything you possibly could. I can tell you, I remember quite well, you would be out at the polls earlier in the day. You would alert the media as to when you and your spouse would be going to the polls to vote, to get all those stories covered. And then you'd sit down for interviews much like this one. But let me emphasize, and I think back to 1998, when I finished an interview like this, I was sharing a microphone with then Arizona Senator Jon Kyl, and once we left that radio studio, John said, now listen, we're getting early numbers in from our intensive polling. We could very well lose the House tonight. So understand, both of the major parties and these candidates with money are polling even today, and that is why our coverage tonight will be so important. What we are seeing, what the pollsters on the outside say are one thing, what the exit pollers say are another, but we're going to see it happen tonight, and it's quite an experience.
All right, we also have a projection from CNN that's South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, no surprise there, maintains his seat in the Senate. He is a Republican, of course, African-American Republican in the U.S. Senate. Okay, I think we're going to go to John when we come back from our break. JD, we're going to go now. All right, let's throw it to John Bachman down also in our Florida headquarters. Hey, John.
How's it going, Steve? JD, great to see you guys as well. We're keeping an eye on the polls that are closing. And Steve, you mentioned some of these stops already coming in, or all these polls already closing in eastern Kentucky. And also, I'm looking at Mitch McConnell surging out to a lead there, and we're waiting for those results to be official, and we'll report them as soon as we have them. Western Kentucky closing at 7 o'clock, Vermont, Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, you mentioned that, also parts of Indiana that are in the central time zone, and parts of New Hampshire and North Dakota. Also going to keep a close eye on that New Hampshire Senate race. Key there. 8 o'clock is also the latest time that those polls in New Hampshire and South Dakota can close. And we've also heard some reports down in Florida that Charlie Crist is seeking to keep polling locations in Broward County, in South Florida. That is a mostly Democratic area down there. He wants to keep those open later so folks can vote there. We've also heard some complaints about long lines in the state of Georgia from Democrats as well. So we're keeping an eye on what's taking place as these polls continue to close. And as soon as we get firm numbers, we will bring them for you here throughout the evening. Steve, back to you.
All right, we also have a report in again from CNN that Nikki Haley has retained her spot in the governor's mansion down in South Carolina, and that was a very controversial race from the standpoint that her opponent had used a derogatory term against her. All right, we will be back with more. This is a countdown to the midterms. We're just getting underway. We have a long night ahead of us, and it's going to be exciting, informative, and you keep it right here on Newsmax Television. Okay, don't go away.
There's nothing sunny about the race for governor in the Sunshine State. Republican incumbent Rick Scott is trying to keep former Governor Charlie Crist from reclaiming the top job in Tallahassee. The fight is playing out in vicious attack ads, which may be why voters don't really like either candidate.
So when you see his ads, remember it was guys like Rick Scott that crashed our economy.
Sponsored by Let's Get to Work. Just the other day.
Do you think that nothing about Obamacare has irreparably harmed Floridians in any way?
No, I don't think so at all. I think it's been great.
In Quinnipiac's September survey, 48% of those polled said they found Scott unfavorable. That compared to a 42% favorable rating. Likewise, Crist got an unfavorable rating of 49% compared to a 41% favorable. The negativity on the airwaves isn't helping either candidate in their uphill climb to sway voters. Scott, throughout his term, has struggled with lower.
Newsmax election special, The Midterms, You Decide 2014, is brought to you by Rosetta Stone, LifeLock, and Home Advisor.